Hey everyone, welcome back to Astro Alchemy. I'm Sarah and I'm with Lora, and we are your hosts for our weekly show where we talk about the gate that the sun is currently moving through from a human design perspective. This week, the sun is moving through gate 28, or these past 3 and next 3 days. So 6 days in total, the sun will be in gate 28. The Earth is in 27, so we're going to be discussing the human design of this transit, and then also touching on the gene keys. And then following that, we're going to talk about some of the astrological transits that are happening currently. Not least of all, the eclipse that just happened in Scorpio, the partial solar eclipse that just happened in Scorpio. And then Jupiter being in Pisces, where it just moved into. And then Mars going retrograde very, very, very soon. So we have a very, very dynamic, lot going on week, and excited to be able to get this out there for the people that like to listen. Just another little reminder, if you like our show, if it resonates, if you feel like you're on our fractal, if you feel like it's correct, please like and subscribe and share with whomever you'd like to share with if you think they'd like it too. And yeah, leave us a comment if there's anything that you want to hear about, or if you have any questions. We'd love to hear them. So other than that, it's Thursday, October 27th, 5:39 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:39 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I think that covers everything. Laura, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I kind of want to do the whole extra plug today, because I realize not everyone listens to the very end. So you might not know that we do readings because you only mentioned that at the end. So if you want a reading from either Sarah or myself, you can reach out to us. Sarah is Third Eye Kiss on Instagram, or thirdeyekissastrology@gmail.com. And my website is lorazonicastrology.com, or hello@lorazonicastrology.com. So do that. We're happy to help you figure out your life if you need our advice. But yeah, I just thought I'd sneak that in before we get started. But as we can get started, like Sarah said, we have the current transit with the sun moving through gene key 28, or gate 28. So if you look up close, as per usual, I'm going to stick on my glasses so I don't have to stick my face into the camera. Gate 28 is here in this plane. So again, that ongoing conversation we've been having about how this chunk of the zodiac belt that we're perusing through is for the most part situated in the splenic center of the human design body graph. I kind of want to do a spiel. I don't know if I'm going to do it. Sarah, should I do my spiel of how is astrology, how is human design put together? Because you might be coming across human design or the body graph for the first time, or maybe you're well accustomed and used to it. But if you're new, you might not understand how it's all configured. So should I explain that?
Do your spiel.
Okay. I feel like my spiel ends up being really long because I keep adding extra things to it, but I'm going to try to keep it just localized to the gates. So if you think about the zodiac belt, there's 360 degrees of the zodiac, and there's 64 I Ching hexagrams for the Chinese I Ching, which I have a book over there, but I never whip it out. I never look at my actual book for the hexagram meetings. And so if we divide 360 by 64, we get approximately 5.5 degrees allocated of the zodiac belt, consecutive 5.5 degrees for every hexagram. And they are arranged in a very precise order around the zodiac belt, because you might wonder, well, okay, so first off, each hexagram that is associated with a 5.5 degree segment of the zodiac belt can be found in the human design body graph in one of 9 different centers. And so when you have a planet moving through that particular segment of the zodiac belt, say Jupiter is currently moving through 25 in, Aries Pisces, as it's moving over that, cusp, that position of the zodiac is associated with gene key 25 or gate 25. And so Jupiter can be found in this energy. It's a corresponding, it's not like Jupiter's in your heart, but it's pretty darn close. figuratively. And so each of these numbers within each of these centers, which are based off the traditional 7-centered chakra Brahma system, but are now 9-centered because of an evolutionary change humans went through in 1781. Upon the discovery of Uranus, we evolved and mutated and became 9-centered beings. But again, that's another spiel for another day. There's plenty of information you can find about it online. But for the most part, when we're talking about like a planetary position, it's in a position in the zodiac belt, and it can be referenced to the human design body graph. And when you have two planets that are activating two gates that are part of a channel, so like 28 connects to gate 38 in the root center down here, when you have both of those, or like for example 50 and 27, there's a planet here in 50 and there's a planet here in 27, they form a channel. And when you have a channel defined, it creates definition between the two centers that are connected to one another through that channel. So the spleen and the sacral for 5027. So in each segment, each gate can be thusly divided into 6 lines, because if you think about a hexagram, here, we don't see the hexagram lines, unfortunately, in this image. You do in other images of the rave mandala, but the way it's divided, I said there's a specific order to it. So hexagrams 1 and 2, which are opposite of one another in Taurus and Scorpio, which are currently defined by the North and South node. So 1 and 2 are here in the G center, and here in this astrological configuration. So the 2 here, North node, and 1 here, South node. Those kind of start the cycle. Line 1 is 6 yin lines. So if you think about an I Ching hexagram, I'm going to scooch on over here to this gene key page, and you can see gene key 28. The I Ching name for it is great excess, and you have 6 parallel horizontal lines stacked on top of one another. The bottom line is considered the first line, then 2, 3, 4 from the top is considered the 6th line. And so each line of the hexagram is also associated with a line of the gate, and it contains a specific meaning and value based on the planet if that is within that position. So when we talk about like line 3, which is the sun's in the 3rd line of the hexagram 28, there's this little spiel, this blurb that we read to you, and it's because the planet, the sun, is within that particular degree. So if you take 5.5 approximate degrees for each gate divided by 6, then you get like 90% of the gate. Math, I can't remember like the precise amount of degrees in minutes. Well, it's less than a degree, because 5 degrees for the whole and divide by 6, so it's a fraction. Less than a degree for each line. Just bringing you the details in case you're curious. If you would like more resources and information, there's plenty of Facebook groups about human design. If you don't know your body graph, go to, well, I like to use genetic matrix, but I always tell people to go to mybodygraph.com or jovianarchive.com to get their body graph. And the reason for that is genetic matrix can sometimes be finicky with daylight savings time. Some people were born during the year that daylight savings was implemented. It wasn't, implemented across the whole world at the exact same time. So there's differences for different countries and what time zone is actual, or what the actual time is at someone's point of birth. So there's discrepancies there. So go to Jovian Archive or my body graph, because it's more likely that you're going to get a more precise body graph regarding time zones. And then you can go to genetic matrix where you can get more information typically, and you'll see if the 2 body graphs match up. So I think that's my spiel for the most part. But now back to gate 28. If you look at the body graph and all these lines, like we say before, if you've been with us, they have certain circuits. So 28 is part of individual circuitry, and individual circuitry deals with individual mutation, like you're a person, you go through something, you have a realization, you have your own internal mechanics, and you mutate. You have an awareness shift, you have a physical shift, whatever it is. The qualities of individual circuitry are about the self, and unfortunately they also have this undercurrent of melancholy that can lead to creativity, or it can lead to depression, or just feeling heavy, feeling dense, wanting that shift to change. individual circuitry works on a pulse. It's like not constant, it's not always there. It's like a dead heartbeat, and then every once in a while, like it'll jump. And every once in a while, you'll get that inspiration for mutation or whatever it is, depending on the gate, that impulse in the moment. But for the most part, it can kind of have like a bit of a dead quality to it. But 28, being in the spleen, is a fear gate, and this fear deals with death and dying. And I like how Richard Rudd puts it in the auditory contemplation that he has, because there's the fear of dying, there's the fear of living, and then there's the fear of not living. So this kind of Gene Key encapsulates all three. It's not just the fear of death and dying. But anyways, this gate is part of this channel 3828, which is the channel of struggle. 38 is the gate of the fighter. It wants to fight for something. It wants to fight for purpose. 28 deals with our sense of purpose in life, and the shadow is purposelessness. So when we don't have purpose, we can get trapped into the fear of death and dying. But 38 is the pressure to fight for purpose, to fight for life, to fight for survival, to fight for existing as a human, for human awareness. And so without this 38, you know, the fear is there, the fear of death, without necessarily the pressure to fight for it. So it can feel a bit melancholic. And that was the gate of our lovely eclipse this past Saturday. No, Monday, whatever day we had the eclipse. And that was the day of our eclipse. And so our eclipse was imbued with this energy of melancholy, of purposelessness, of existentialism. It's all great. But we can scooch on over here and we'll redo this aforementioned blurb, which is 28, Preponderance of the Great. And I really like this title because I feel like the great refers to the great demise of humankind. It's the preponderance of death, but it's the transitoriness of power and influence, the gate of risk-taking. Line 3 is adventurism, unfounded risk-taking. Saturn in exaltation, a basic conservatism that even in adventurous acts is necessarily prudent, an intuitive caution in risk-taking in times of struggle. And just on these notes of risk-taking, I feel like that's more well explained through the Gene Key, just heads up. And then Jupiter in detriment here, a perverse manifestation of Jupiter's expansiveness, where risk-taking is rationalized and failure ensured. Intuitive rationalizing of risk brings failure in times of struggle. So there's that. And like Sarah mentioned earlier, the programming partner of the sun is the Earth in Gene Key 27, which is creating this channel, which we covered last time, the channel of preservation. And also, ironically enough, I feel like last time with the sun in gate 50, I talked about how it's like one of the most Libra energies because it's all about equilibrium and balance and harmony and all that. I feel like 28 is like the core of Scorpio. It's about death and dying. And I feel like the sun shifting over the cusp of like Libra to Scorpio goes through these two gates, and it's just like very rich in the heart of these two signs and their cores and their energies. But Sarah, is there anything else you think I left out or should mention, or anything you want to mention regarding this chart before I close it so y'all can see our pretty little faces?
No, I think that you did a good job. I think, you know, just to touch on the human design and astrology of it too, it's very interesting that the Venus Cazimi that we touched on last week happened in the 50. And then while Venus was still within a couple of degrees of the sun during the partial solar eclipse, then we had the partial solar eclipse in the 28. And so it very much is like Venus went through this death and rebirth process in Libra to take her into this you know, kind of like the underworld in Scorpio. But no, as far as this chart, I don't think that there's anything else I'd like to add on. I think you did a good job.
Okay. I guess I'll share the Gene Key chart and then we can just share our abstract experience with it. So like I mentioned, purposelessness is the shadow of this Gene Key, with the gift being totality and the city being immortality, embracing the dark side of Scorpio. It's part of the codon ring of illusion, 2832. Just reference, we talked about 32 2 weeks ago. Well, actually it was last week, but we did a twofer for you last week. 32 is here. Also in the spleen, reaching towards the root center, or the root center is reaching up towards the spleen. So these guys are buddies next to one another in the human design body graph, and they're part of the same codon ring of illusion. Programming partner 27 with selfishness, altruism, selflessness. Victims. Okay, so the two shadow frequencies, what's the word? Repressive, reactive is hollow and gambling kind of has that quality of being a risk taker. Physiology deals with the kidneys. Okay, I think that's enough for this. I came prepared this week. Let me stop the screen share. I came prepared this week and I took notes. I highlighted stuff in the book to talk about. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the human design gate side of it, I guess, before getting, or is it like enmeshed and intertwined? Is there anything you want to say about the gate before I talk about this, the gene key? I'm not sure. At least personally for myself, or should I try to explain it? Ooh, my brain doesn't know where it wants to go. Sarah, you take over while my brain figures itself out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think that like you were saying, there's so much Scorpio energy you can feel in this key, and like in so many different ways. There's things that are coming up for me in my life within experiencing other people's lives by them sharing it with me that has to do with this key. You know, there's a quality of, you know, one thing that I've seen collectively is that there's a lot of people who live in a sense, like Richard Rudd talks about, a half-life, where they're not fully in their lives. They're kind of like living in the shallow end because they're unwilling to embrace their fear. And their fear, of course, I mean, for you know, for good reason. The fear is fear, right? You don't want to really entangle yourself with it. At least the ego mind doesn't want to, because it doesn't feel subjectively pleasant to engage it. And yet, if you don't engage it, the likelihood of you being able to reach your creative potential is so low. Actually, it's zero. You can't if you don't integrate your fears. And so this is like, it feels, even though it's in the spleen, there's also a sense of the qualities of the emotional solar plexus, which is avoiding confrontation and truth, because it has to do with your own personal truth. And, you know, there's people, especially in the spiritual community, and I've seen this happen all the time, where they're really good at speaking the jargon, they're really good at talking about the shadow, really good at talking about the ego, really good at expressing and parroting the concepts. And yet they are still not, their shadow has still not been integrated. They haven't eaten it. They haven't digested it. They're kind of sitting on top of it, acting like they're all love and light, where the shadow is underneath everything, creating all of these situations in their life that are, you know, kind of chaotic in order for them to be brought into awareness of it. But, you know, we can avoid the birth canal for as long as we want. I mean, we could probably avoid it until death, and a lot of people do. And the people that are like that, for me, Pluto in the first house, Pluto rising, it's like I don't have a choice in dealing with my darkness, with my shadow. And there's still plenty of it that I have to integrate and own, that I still have work, quote unquote, to do, which we all have work kind of perpetually in our lives. So it's not to say that it'll ever be over, but just the sense of, in this chapter, talking about the avoidance of this kind of fear that underlies all fears, which is the fear of death. It kind of amalgamates into this feeling that crystallizes within you, where it's no longer, and we touched on fear a lot this past month, but it's no longer a specific thing. It's like this vibratory thing that lives inside of you, that is, you know, that you're kind of used to dwelling on or within, and you're kind of used to its presence within your physical body. And that's the like primordial, or like the sacred wound. I don't know if it actually has to do with the the sacred wounding in gene keys, this particular key, but there is some comparisons that can be drawn between this and that, because it does have to do with this kind of like fear that underlies all different fears. And the type of people that I was just talking about, like those are the hollow people, right? And Richard Rudd talks about how the people who are hollow like that, who are living half lives, who haven't integrated their shadow, and so they're living kind of like on top of, lake, they're living like on top of like a lake that's like filled with sharks, and they're pretending like, they're sunbathing, and that everything's fine, and that there's not a ton of, predators in the water beneath. Those people, they move through life and they can fool a lot of people, but for people who have taken time to face their own darkness and have had to look at their shadow for long periods, and really come to terms with it, they can't fool those people. And so no matter how involved in the spiritual community you are, no matter how much you're able to speak the jargon of it, like the hollowness is evident for anybody who has eyes to see, because they understand this nature of having to integrate shadow, and people who haven't, how there's this difference in the way that they embody their lives. And so that was the repressive nature. And then the reactive nature is the gambling, which is just like people who are constantly running from their fear. And so it's like and they're using their fear as fuel, but instead of actually, again, like going to the deeper issue or addressing the deeper issue, there's like all of these straw men in their life where it's like they think that if they get past this particular fear, this particular obstacle, if they run away from this particular thing, they'll be able to outrun it. But then it always morphs and changes shapes and turns into something else, and they're still running. And so it's like this kind of this marathon run from fear that, inevitably ends in basically you just being burnt out and exhausted, because ultimately, like, there's always going to be something else to run from. And until you allow it to catch up with you, until you integrate it, it continues to chase you down. But those are the two sides of it. Do you want to add anything while I take a
breather? I think about like the risk taker as someone who's an adrenaline junkie. Like they're not willing to go deep within themselves to like be honest with themselves, like hence that avoiding confrontation and truth theme. But instead they're gonna like do whatever else they can do to like pretend to live a full life. And I feel like this is where the purposelessness is. It's like this is the gate of purpose. People with this gene key are here to have a sense of purpose and to feel like they're living for a reason. It's like this spleen deals with our survival and our instinct and making sure that we can continue to exist, stay alive. And so if you have a reason to continue doing that, then your spleen's gonna, make sure that you're doing everything correctly to ensure the longevity of your life. But because it's the individual gate, we are not always plugged into that sense of purpose. And then there's like that pressure that's coming from the root that says like, what is your purpose? Do you have a purpose? Like, what are you doing with your life? And so this particular gene key, because Sarah and I both have 38, so we both have the fighter energy that wants to fight for something. It's the pressure that's looking for that outlet, but we don't have the 28. We don't have that instinctive knowing of, okay, this is worth fighting for. This is the purpose that you're here to pursue, to live for. It's like there's this huge heavy energy of like, what are you doing with your life in a nutshell? Which purpose also connects to that G center, which is a sense of belonging and a sense of knowing what the trajectory of your life is there for, and like being on the right path and things like that, compared to like this very specific splenic energy of like, this is how I'm going to survive. This is what I'm going to do. I don't necessarily know if this is connected to a particular gift or shadow or witch, but sorry, there's a loud car driving by. I don't know if that picked up on camera, but or audio. But I did a masterclass several weeks ago, and I looked at the chart of the person who did the masterclass, and they have this gene key, not the whole channel, but just 28. And something that they said during the masterclass was like, imagine you're on your deathbed, and imagine that you were looking back at your entire life And do you feel ready to die? Like, do you feel like you've lived a fulfilling life? Or do you have a sense of like, oh no, I wish I lived more. I wish I lived more fully. I wish that I did this or I did that, like that sensation of like, I'm not ready to go yet, that fear of death. And I was just thinking like, like I've been ready to go like years ago, like I'm done. And so I just thought it was very interesting, like looking at this person's chart and this fear that they're motivating into their clients. Like if you're the fear of death as a motivational factor to live a more fulfilling life. For some, it's correct, but that's not necessarily the correct programming to like plug into everyone. I mean, again, this is this person, her story and her life, but so it's different, but it just makes you think how like some of us, it's incorrect to be programmed to have that fear of death, to live a more fulfilling life out of that insecurity. And I guess this kind of propels us towards the totality. I think it's totality, the name of the, yes, the gift. But Richard Rudd talks about, I think I'll have to look at my notes. He talks about how like there's a correct energy of risk taking. It's not like running from your fears or being an adrenaline junkie. And it's not like your mind is driving you. It's like this moment to moment existence where you're in the flow, and in that flow, the right risks and opportunities come. And because you're in that intuitive state that you know what's correct for you, you will have the energy and like the correct courage to face that fear when it meets you. And so it's like, you know, every little risk is another stepping stone to like live a more fulfilling life, so to speak, to reach out of that comfort zone, to like take the next step that makes you uncomfortable, then the next step, then the next step. And it can lead you somewhere great, but it's not about running away from something or trying to, you know, put on a false facade. But I'm going to try to find my notes because I feel like I took quotes for all three of these gifts and shadows and cities. So all your inner demons emanate from a single source, an egregore, or collectively all your fears rolled into one. This is the archdemon, the antichrist, or the doppelganger within each of us. The 28th shadow truly represents everything within your psyche that you do not wish to accept, right down to your core fear of non-existence. Only as you reclaim each of these dark aspects of your inner being can you begin to assemble and manifest the true purpose of your life. This is the magic and true purpose of the 28th shadow. I have thoughts about immortality, but we can get there later. But I guess those are my notes for the shadow. Sarah can move on to the gift, if she pleases.
I just want to, I that was one of the things that I underlined too, because, which I was glad about, because I've been talking about the not self, like it's your evil twin, your doppelganger, you know, and Ra talks about how the not self is this like terribly complex being, because the not self for many of us is bouncing around from open center to open center, and like the way that it shows up depending on the individual is so specific. Just as unique as your actual design, your not self is actually, you know, very unique and complicated. And so it's like there's this, you know, even though Richard Rudd in here is talking about this crystallized version of your fear that isn't like actually like a specific thing, but it's more of like this general gestalt of fear that you hold. It, you know, it reminded me of the not self, and like the not self, you know, really has a lot to do with fear, because it's the mind has a lot to do with fear, because it's always stuck in duality of right and wrong, black and white, you know, just these separations or these like false dichotomies that pull us back and forth, being into being concerned with things that we shouldn't be concerned with. And so I thought that was interesting. Just wanting to touch on a couple other things in the shadow. You know, two things that I thought were interesting was just that, of course, he talks about very scorpionic, needing to pass into the underworld in order to be able to face your unconscious fears, and like having to go down into the depths of the darkness in order to do that. And like Laura was talking about, potentially that's not for everyone. But for people who are very Plutonian, we're like, yeah, that's, that's been on my ticket for as long as I can remember. It's just like this quality of like needing to go into the your own unconscious. And he talks about how shamans, what they do is they work in frequency. And so when we think about entities, the entity really is a frequency that either needs to be integrated or dislodged from your system. And so depending on the nature of the fear, so let's say it's a fear that it's not your fear, right? It was like given to you because of the way that your family did things, but it's actually not correct for you to experience it. Like that's an instance where probably the fear needs to be dislodged. Whereas if it's a fear that like is actually like a part of you coming to terms with the limitations that exist within your life in order to get further on the path of your fractal, of yourself, of like the divine individuation that you're here to do, like that's a type of fear that needs to be integrated, that needs to be digested, that needs to move through you. How to discern the difference? I guess it's like find a shaman. I don't know, because it's, and it's not like everyone that claims to be a shaman, of course, is like really legitimate. So, but this is like part of what any of us who are on the path to decondition ourselves think about a lot, about, what fear is relevant and correct for me to feel versus what fear is lodged within the not self and my conditioning. Because all fear is not inherently negative. It's just the lack of awareness around it, the numbing of it, the avoidance of it, like that becomes problematic. And like having to get back to that very base level of understanding the root of it is really important. So do you want to talk on the gift?
Sure. I mean, I don't know if I have much to say other than the quotes that I picked out, but to be total in the sense of this gift also means to live without allowing your mind to dictate your life. Again, don't listen to like this is the life lived for the moment, in the full knowledge that purpose can only be found in the present moment rather than in the distant future. So that's, I guess, what I was referring to half a second ago. And another quote, the state of totality appears to be a continual state of taking risks, not the unfounded risks of a 28th shadow, but the risk of building something that you cannot really see until it's complete. What you are building, of course, is the path of your true destiny. This is a path of deep trust in which the individual strikes out on their path, surrendering to their whole being in the mystery of life and its hidden rhythms. I guess I want to bring clarification to what Sarah called me out on. Like, I feel like it's correct for everyone to go into their shadow and to like integrate it and to embrace the darkness, some more than others, right? Plutonian beings. But what I was saying is incorrect is to, it's to have a purpose. Like this gets into heavy, trickly stuff. I can't think of the right adjective, but I like my hashtag, not my hashtag, my whatever it is on my website, my little like mojo thing is guiding and inspiring you, I think, to find and discover, no, what is it? Something about helping people figure out their purpose, right? Like that's what I claim to do through, the lens of astrology and human design. And so I feel like for me, this Gene Key Gate has been ongoing again because it's an eclipse. It's not just like a singular moment, but it kind of has a more heavy weight. So like this theme has been coming up for more than just this week for me of like, what is our purpose? And even though this is an individual case, it's about like your own unique individual purpose. I've been contemplating the purpose of humankind again through Rave Cosmology. Which, let's pretend, don't want to say things, this is like how it is, don't want to confirm that and energetically, but like if you study Rave Cosmology, let's pretend that the purpose of humankind is to explore self-reflective consciousness, right? Humans, we have brains that allow us to understand who we are, and we have that self-reflective consciousness. Like that's, as a race, our purpose. Let's pretend. I'm going to keep saying let's pretend. And so if you look into human design, because this is a slice of the pie, looking at your body graph, looking at your strategy and authority, it's just like one little piece of the whole puzzle. And the way that this piece gets credit is based on the whole puzzle and the whole pie. And the whole pie suggests that humankind has an end date. Like we have a day in which we're no longer going to exist because, as Richard Rudd talks about in many more eloquent words than raw, we're going to be reborn as a different type of being. There is a new future for what is self-reflected awareness coming. I'm not going to say it's for humankind, but for self-reflected awareness, like there is a future that is far distant. It's like, I don't know, 500 or million or 500 billion years in the future, long ways ahead of us. But there is going to be a time, hopefully, if things go according to plan, in which we will be reborn as, light beings or however you want to call it. And so I've been thinking about, okay, humankind here now, like we're here now, we're in these flesh bodies here and now, we have our self-awareness here and now, and we have this collective purpose for like the planet Earth, like planet Earth's here for a reason, and we have this purpose. And it just seems so daunting and yet so futile to like think about like every individual and like, oh yeah, I'm doing my life here for me, gonna go through my experiences and my stuff, when we have an expiration date. I don't know. It's just like this whole gene key has been weighing very heavily on my mind in terms of looking at the totality, in terms of looking at immortality and like what's to come, because we get fixated with our mental self-awareness on like the present moment and living life moment to moment, experiencing everything in their day-to-day lives, working towards something, as Richard Rudd says, building towards something that's our true destiny that can only be seen after it's already been built. And yet to like look at the whole picture, it's rather overwhelming. I don't know how I got into here. I like had a burgeoning thought that took me down this path. I guess this is like more immortality stuff, but I don't know. Thoughts, Sarah?
No, I mean, that was a mouthful. I mean, I don't necessarily have any thoughts in response to it, but on the individual level, and to talk about totality too, there's this sense that, again, those of us in the spiritual community can get really caught up on like everyone wanting to be all love and light and like to be correct, you're supposed to be good. And like, actually, that's not it. To be correct, you have to throw yourself 100% into whatever the act and character that your life is supposed to embody. And so it's like, you could be the villain. It's what Richard Rudd says. You could be the hero. You could be any of the different shades of characterology in your life. But what I guess creates a sense of correctness, or what creates a sense of totality, is if you're able to fully 100% be present for whatever character you're here to play. And I think about that a lot because, I feel like a lot of us, because of the not self mind, are often like 70% in and 30% like trying to like control, 30% like trying to pull the strings and not like 100% in on our character. And so I think with people who are embodying the gift of this, there's a sense that they're able to embody their character. And it's why, people, I don't want to say like the Kardashians because they're a terrible example, but for some reason they're the first ones that came to mind, and their show, which for me, it's like not anything that I really want to watch or I find life fulfilling. But they're being them, they're being their characters, whatever their characters are here to be, like that's what they're being. And so when you're fully embodying the character that you're supposed to be, like it is, it's inherently something that other people are absorbed by just watching, because so few of us are able to fully embody it. And so I think that was important. And then within the same line of thought, Richard Rudd talks about how the people who ultimately fulfill or become more in alignment with their own totality, they have like this deep sense of purpose, and it transcends their individual lives, right? They see, okay, I have to be this fully, or they intuit it, or they just know in their guts or in their spleen that I have to be this totality. And by me being this, everybody that's on my fractal that's correct for me is affected by it. And then they have this burning passion to be what it is that they are. And, you know, it could show up like a Gandhi, but it doesn't have to. It could show up like anyone who's fully living their purpose. It could be an artist, a mother, you know, a knitter, just anyone who's doing what's correct for them to do, big, small, middling, or otherwise. So I just wanted to talk about how the totality shows up and how correctness is less a function of good and more a function of just being fully you're expressing the uniqueness of your design.
I like that.
Yeah. And then I actually don't really have too much on the immortality side. Do you want to touch on anything before we move on?
I have a quote for immortality too, but it's basically, you know, that we're going to be reborn as an immortal form, and you know, in religions we get hung up. I think that was another thing I wanted to bring up. I had a lot of thoughts, and I was like, I want to bring that up too. Like, our religions feed us this notion that, you know, we are for the most part immortal souls, and that, you know, there is life after death, and we're gonna, you know, move on to whatever comes next. And a lot of them have it, like not all of them, but a lot of religions are built upon, you know, this shamanic experience of dying and what comes after the veil closes. And it just makes me think about, you know, from the human design perspective, yes, I guess, but like, to be a self-aware form, you know, to have your consciousness of understanding who you are, that is pertinent to the physical form that you are inhabiting. You know, it's the form that allows self-reflected consciousness. Without the form, you cannot have self-reflected consciousness. Plants, I pick up a plant, but I don't want to pick them up. A plant, here you go, a plant has a personality crystal, so they have the potential, there you go, has the potential for self-reflected awareness. However, the form of a plant is not conducive for self-reflected awareness. And so like this full buddy has a personality crystal just like you or me, that's implanted with data based on its birthday. It has all that information, just like I have information, but it's being a human that allows for us to have this experience that we're having. And this plant made me lose my train of thought. Something along the lines of, what was I saying a second ago? Do you remember? Immortality. Okay, so religions condition us to think that there's something that happens after the fact, but after the fact, we're just a personality crystal because we lose our form. Our form, you know, disintegrates, dies, stays here, and our personality crystal moves on. And without the form, it doesn't have self-awareness. And yet we're constantly being fed this idea that, you know, there is something that's going to come later. But again, this thing won't come for, again, can't remember if it's 500 billion or 500 million years from now. But I had other thoughts too. I'm being distracted. I'll read my quote for now and see if that triggers them. But finally, a few words about the future role of the 28th city. As was stated earlier, the city contains the seed of the manifestation of immortality in form. After all the cities have dawned in humanity and our collective body has begun to transmute to its future form, the 60th city will flower and all the laws that hold our world together will dissolve. We're going to be attacked by a meteor, basically. But at that time, elements of our future vehicle will coalesce and begin to form another kind of vehicle to house the higher consciousness of humanity. But it's like not just humanity, because like this little buddy is also going to die, and this little buddy's personality crystal might get to experience the new form of consciousness that's coming, not just the humans. So I disagree with you, Retrograde. Of humanity. In this vehicle, the 28th city will finally come to fruition. In doing so, it will synthesize the animal soul of Gaia with the human soul, thus making an immortal body. Herein lies the secret behind all codes within our mythologies, where man and beast are combined as one. Gets into weird stuff with animals. The animal kingdoms of our planet constitute an awareness that already operates in the immortal field, and whose sacrifice suggests an evolution even higher than our own. At a physical level, man must absorb his entire animal nature into himself in order for its true purpose to be shown, only then will we see for the first time the true nature of the beast. What did I want to talk about immortality rates? Oh, I've been thinking about, the difference between like religions and science. Because in science, they believe that, your consciousness is a construct of your brain. And it is, again, pertinent to the form. You die, you don't have an afterlife because for whatever reason, wherever that spark of consciousness came from, it can only exist with the brain that's allowing it to exist. It comes from, the hallucination of our brain system. I don't know if like any of these noises are coming up on the audio, but like family members are making a lot of noise out there and it's distracting. But anyways, I've just been contemplating this like big piece, preponderance of the great. I've been prepondering this great piece of immortality and what comes next, and like how valid is science and how valid are religions and their impositions on us and on our, the way we live our lives based on what is not related to the human form, right? Like, because they say, do this, and then in the afterlife you'll have that, but can't prove it anyways. And I've been deep in preponderance for the most part. That's all I have to say. And I don't want to scare you, but like 25% of personality crystals won't be joining us in the future, joining us. Like maybe I'm one of them. Not everyone's going to move on into the next great thing, whatever it is. So that's also like been like a fear in the back of my head of just like, am I the one? Am I the one that's not going to move on? Am I the one that's going to get left behind when the world disintegrates? Who knows? We don't know. And so some of us, as we were saying earlier, are here to like know things and aren't like this. Our body graphs, gonna share screen again. Like we have our body graphs, we have what's consistent within us, we have definition in our charts. People with a defined spleen, they have a built-in splenic intuitive instinctive awareness. Not everyone comes equipped with that innate survival instinct in their body that's going to tell them what to pursue, what to do. Not everyone has gate 28 where it's correct for them to experience their own mutative process to understand what their piece in the totality is. We can have glimpses of it like we are now with this current gene key, but as you can tell, it has melancholy associated with it. If you can't tell from my great preponderance over here, it's deeply melancholic and can be depressive, but within that is the spark for mutation, the spark for knowing what's going to happen and knowing how you fit in the totality and what your purpose is. So if you're in a similar boat as me, hang in there. It's gonna be over soon, I hope. But it's this effect, and it is potent because I've been feeling it. I've been contemplating this for more than just this week. It is heavy in whatever form it's showing up as. So just wanted to share that while we're here. I mean, Sarah, is there anything else you want to share about the gene key or gate?
Again, another mouthful. I guess just to reassure our listeners that there's a complicated process at work in the evolution of our lives, and like for the most part, for most of us, we're not going to be around to see anything that is remotely looking like the world ending in our physical forms. And so not to be doom and gloom, because of course there's a larger framework that's at work in the evolution of consciousness in general. And I think that part of the reason that we're here is to become aware of our own capacity as co-creators. Even though there's no choice, it's like the quality of surrender that we can access that allows us to watch how perfect and beautiful our lives are is such an incredible gift. Despite all of the crystallized fear that still lives inside most of us, right? However it constellates, I think that, it's important to, at every juncture, just like be grateful for the life that we are inhabiting, even if we haven't figured out how to express it in its totality yet. And, you know, we're still in the process of deconditioning. And I think that like focusing there, generally speaking, on how to express ourselves within our totality is like probably one of the most important things, because that's not just a broad, like sweeping statement, because everybody's totality is going to be so unique to them. And it's going to be different, you know, one person's totality, right, in the quarter of initiation versus the quarter of duality versus the quarter of mutation versus the quarter of civilization. Like they're all going to show up very differently. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we even have to understand the processes that are underlying the totality of our lives, but just like the ability to watch and like rapturous delight at it is probably going to make the ride a lot smoother as passenger consciousness. So that's my little side tangent after some, you know, end of the world shenanigans.
And gloom. Which gene key is Rapture? Do you remember?
I don't.
Look it up because you brought that word up. On that note, thanks, Sarah, for calming us all down and soothing our not self minds. I'll share the astrology at the moment so we can move on. This is okay. So this was from earlier today.
It's 30. It's 30.
30. Yeah. Oh, you have it then.
Yeah. My moon. Yeah.
This is from earlier. So here, Jupiter is still in Aries. I don't know if Jupiter has moved into Pisces yet.
Can you reload that, because you should be able to get I just want to see Jupiter in Pisces. That's my whole excitement here. I'm like, yes, Jupiter in Pisces.
Nope, still not there yet. I think like around midnight is when it's gonna move.
Okay. Yeah, it was in 0.02, like probably like 5 hours ago. Oops, gotta mute that. Sorry. It's still in Aries. All right. Well,
we can still talk about it.
Yeah, no, of course we can. But when you hear this, but we can't be like, oh, the quality. Hold on, let me mute this really quick. The quality of the energy that we're in right now is still Jupiter in Aries. Yeah. But when you listen to this, it will in fact be in Pisces. I mean, maybe if you're like the very first person to listen to it, it won't, but like more than likely it will. Which I think is, you know, I think it's important to pay attention to a couple things. One of those things is what was going on. What was going on beginning the first 5 months of 2022?
I can do dates quickly. Hold on. Jupiter went retrograde on July 28th in Aries at 8 degrees Aries. And so now he's, you know, retrograde and backing up over this degree. And he's going to continue to be retrograde until November 23rd. So we're going to have about a month more, and then he's going to go direct. I did not write down the degree, but it's within this gate. And then he's going to go direct again. And he's going to go back into Aries on December 20th. So sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to.
Does Jupiter go into the 36, or is it just in the 25?
No, just 1725.
Okay. Just wanted to, of course, because I'm like, oh, that's mine, you know. But no, that's definitely interesting and important to note from a human design perspective. But from a personal and astrology chart perspective, you know, where does Jupiter in Pisces fall in your personal chart? So if you're Pisces rising, it's going to be in your first house, which is about the self. If you are a Aquarius rising, it's going to be in your second house, which is about your resources that support you. If you are a Capricorn rising, it's going to be in your third house of siblings, short trips, and like your local environment. If you are a Sagittarius, it's going to be in your fourth house of home and family. If you are a Scorpio, it's going to be in your fifth house. Scorpio rising is going to be in your fifth house of creativity, romance. children. If you are a Libra rising, it's going to be in your 6th house of daily activity, daily routines, work, things of that nature, daily habits. If you are a Virgo rising, it's going to be in your 7th house of one-on-one personal dynamics and relationships. If you are a Leo rising, it's going to be in your 8th house of emotional indebtedness and emotional contracts within relational dynamics. Again, there's some other people's psychic load energy of the people in your life. If you are a Cancer rising, it's going to be in your 9th house, which is foreign travel, publishing, higher learning. If you are a Gemini rising, it's going to be in your 10th house of your basically your work in the world, but more than that, it's the way that you are that you show up in the world at large. If you are a here I'm like, okay, we're almost there. If you are a Taurus rising, it's going to be in your 11th house, which is about hopes, dreams, personal ambitions, networks. And if you are a Aries rising, it's going to be in your 12th house of well, there's a lot of different things for the 12th house. Sometimes it's your blind spot, sometimes it's a self-undoing. It's a deeply spiritual house, can do with your unconscious, but it can also do with your connection to your connection to your unconscious. So I just wanted to go through that because whatever rising sign it's in, likely there was something with Jupiter or Jupiterian going on when Jupiter was in Pisces for the first 5 months of the year in 2022, this year. And Jupiter in Pisces is at home and it's not going to be there for another 12 years. So this is kind of like the farewell to Jupiter in Pisces. Jupiter in Pisces is pretty chill. It's very receptive in quality, but it's very nurturing and like growth oriented and hopeful. It's not necessarily about action. It's more about nurturance. So with all that being said, do you want to add anything to Jupiter in Pisces, Laura?
Yeah, back when it was in Pisces, Sarah kept on saying how it's very fertile. Like Pisces is a water sign, there's lots of nourishment. It was a time of putting seeds in the ground and, the rain was pouring down, so they were being well watered in. And then the Aries energy was like, okay, let's see what blooms. Let's see what comes out of this mush of mud and seeds and rain. That was Sarah's referencing. Personally, that's not how it felt. I'm an Aries rising and Jupiter rules my sun and my moon, and it rules because I'm a Sag sun with a Pisces moon, so it also, as an Aries rising, rules my 9th and 12th houses. And then I, like Sarah said, deals with higher learning, philosophy, your belief systems. 12th is also a very spiritual house, and the 12th house is the house of undoing. During that time, like my belief systems were crumbling and I didn't know what to believe in. And as a Sagittarius, my sense of self comes from what I believe in. And so it was like the planet that rules me was falling apart at the seams, and it was not a fun time, not a very nurturing, gentle, caring time at all. So wanted to bring differentiation to say it's not necessarily the case for everyone. It could be, especially like say Jupiter rules your 4th house, your emotions, or your 2nd house, your values. Like maybe it would have been a nicer transit for you. But like particulars matter in your chart. So that's why you should get a reading with me and Sarah to know your particulars. But there's nuance there, so much nuance. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. If the seams that I had to sew up will start unraveling again, time will tell. At least it's a short transit, like Sarah said. It's kind of like bidding farewell to Jupiter in Pisces because we won't get it for another 12 years. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens. Also, from like the human design perspective, Jupiter is like the God. Like if you think about the word God, it's an acronym in human design speak, which stands for Global Orchestration Directories. And Jupiter is kind of in charge of like everything. Jupiter somehow, like planets have certain responsibilities within our quote unquote cosmos and how they filter information. Like Mercury is important, the sun's obviously very important. Not just in terms of like the messages they bring to us with the neutrino stream, like, you know, oh, Venus represents our values, and so based on where Venus is, we have this interpretation of the values. We're getting the neutrinos from Venus's consciousness. Venus also, like this plant, has a personality crystal, kind of design crystal. It might be reincarnating 500 million years from now or whenever it is. But Jupiter has his own responsibilities. Like he doesn't just stream the neutrino information. He's a field star. And so he kind of orchestrates everything, like the incarnation process, like you being in the physical body that you are now, that's thanks to Jupiter. And so like it has this really huge weight as a planet. It is a huge planet. It's the biggest in our solar system apart from, you know, the sun. But like the gravitational pull of Jupiter is immense. Like it's just this big heavy weight. So it's interesting to think about from that lens. Don't know if it brings any value or sense to your little noggin, not if you're an undefined head, but I think it's interesting then to like think about the impact of the neutrino stream coming from Jupiter and how Jupiter is orchestrating everything. And then he's having his own filter through his particular gates that he's moving through. And like, how do those connect? How do we get our whole everything? I feel like it's like not an appropriate word, everything, but I can't think of another word that encapsulates what Jupiter does. But all that then gets filtered with this layer of like, okay, gene key 25 right now, because that's where Jupiter is, this energy of innocence and living in the present moment and having love and compassion and unconditional love for everything. It's quote unquote everything. Maybe that's the word, why I'm using that word to describe Jupiter. But yeah, those are my 2 cents on Jupiter. It's short, so, you know, keep your eyes open and see what happens, watch the movie. But in other news, we have Mars going retrograde, and like I have a lot of notes, mathematical notes on that one. I don't know if you want me to do that first or if you want to talk about it energetically first, Sarah.
I just want to touch on a couple other things about Jupiter and follow up with something that you said. Just that it is going like thank you for giving your experience with the 12th house, because it's so important to differentiate like what is considered in astrology good versus what actually happens in your chart. Because similarly with this past Venus transit, Venus in Libra, which is in her home sign, for me it was like, you know, it was hard. It was a very difficult transit because it was in my 12th house. And so I was having a lot of Venusian 12th house themes coming up around higher, like basically a higher spiritual quality of love, letting go of some of my old patterns around relational dynamics, letting go of some of my fear around being loved, and just the way that I have expectations in that regard. And that was hard. That was painful. And interestingly, when Venus went into Scorpio and the Sun went into Scorpio, which is my first house in whole sign, I immediately felt like better about it. And Venus is not at home in Scorpio. She's in Mars's home in traditional astrology in Scorpio. And so you would think that that wouldn't be a good transit. But for me, because it's my first house, I'm loving this Venusian sun in the first house energy. I like it a lot more than the 12th house energy, even though she's technically more at home in Libra. So, but that's because of my chart, the way that my chart dynamics work. So I think it's just important to like really, really, like Lora said, like it depends on your chart. Jupiter in Pisces could be terrible or amazing, and any real placement can have the qualities of good, bad, or otherwise, depending on your chart and depending on your level of consciousness. So we talk about these things from our own understanding of the archetypes that are at play, but everything with a grain of salt, especially when it comes to astrology. Human design is more cut and dry. Astrology is more of an interpretive art, as far as I'm concerned. So just to make sense of that. And then I really liked what you were saying about Jupiter being this organizing energy, because the other thing that's happening, and this will bleed into the Mars retrograde, that you can kind of take and run with is just that Jupiter's been retrograde, and like because everybody has like is like afraid of retrogrades, people are like, you know, with Mars retrograde, it's like, oh my God, Mars is going retrograde. Like, let's freak out about Mars retrograde. And it's not, you know, Jupiter's been retrograde for how long? Like, it's been retrograde for a while now. And like nothing, like it hasn't ended all of our Jupiterian things. We haven't gotten like punished in Jupiterian ways. It's just that Jupiter, the planet, is closest to Earth right now. And so Jupiter themes may be more exaggerated, but it's not inherently bad. And so to just use that as a springboard for talking about Mars retrograde, Lora, do you want to kind of give some background on it?
Yeah, 1 second. I'm gonna screen share. Oh, if I can figure it out. Just to give you an idea of where planets are. So we say Jupiter is closer to Earth. Obviously, this is not to scale. This is the planetstoday.com. I recommend it if you like having a visual bird's eye view, not like an astrological chart, but like bird's eye view of where everything is. So sun's over here and Mercury and Venus are on the far side of the sun. So like the sun, I consider to be a filtering influence. When the planets move through the sun, their energy gets filtered and it takes longer for them to come to us. You know, visually seeing them in the sky, they're smaller. So it's a more gentle, not so harsh effect versus like planets that are up close and personal. So Jupiter's, you know, awfully close to the Earth. Same with Mars. Again, not trying to scale. Their influence is not only larger because they're appearing to be larger in the night sky, but their gravitational pull is stronger on us because we're physically in the same area of the solar system. We're, you know, spinning around together. And so their influence is more strongly felt. But I wanted to have a visual and I forgot to. I was going to draw a picture for you guys. So will I do that or will I just use this visual? I may just use this visual. With the interior planets like Venus and Mercury, when they're retrograde, they're over here in between the sun and the Earth. And again, physically closer, more intense, more concentrated planetary energies. But that's also kind of the position that the moon is in when it's a new moon. When like right now we're, you know, we just came out of an eclipse, so the moon is still here in between the sun and the Earth. When a planet is like within this area, it's considered new. We can't see it because it's, you know, next to the sun in the sky. Sun's very bright, we don't see it, but it gets that fresh start, that rebirth of a new cycle. And then as these planets move around their orbit, and they're on the far side, when unlike a full moon, you know, when the moon is over here on the far side of the Earth, because it's on the far side, we can see it fully illuminated, except, you know, the next one, which will be an eclipse. But usually when it's on the far side, it's fully illuminated, so we see it as a full moon. But with Mercury and Venus, where they're on the far side, they're hiding behind the sun. They're still out during the day when the sun is out, and so we can't really see them. And so we see those two planets when they're like on the outskirts over here and over here, within their orbit, when they're, you know, it's called morning star and evening star for Venus, when she's just far enough from the sun to be visible, like around sunset and sunrise, but they're not going to get far from the sun astrologically. But when you come to the other planets, and so we'll, you know, this energy, because it's a quote unquote full moon energy, it's similar in energetics. It can be considered when these planets are at their peak, when they're most, you know, physically vibrant, so to speak. If you think about a full moon, like the moon, we notice the moon most when it's full, their energy is present. Like there's this pregnancy, this blossoming, this opening up of these planets, and they're getting filtered through the sun, so it's a little gentler. But when it comes to Mars and the outer planets are retrograde when they're on this side of the Earth. So like Jupiter has this little halo around it because it's retrograde, same with Uranus, and Mars will soon have this little halo around it when it goes retrograde on October 30th. But so with these planets, their influence is strongest on us when they're over here. And then they're more often visible during the night because we're going to see them during different parts of the year. And it's only when they're on the far side over here, conjunct the sun, that they're really invisible. But then as they, wiggle away from the sun, we can see them. My point with all this, I looked up dates to look at the patterns of Mars. Last week and the week before, we talked about Venus, how she's very regulated. She's in control of her orbit and her cycle. She's going to show up regularly year after year in the same spot, do her thing, whether it's a conjunction when she's direct or a conjunction when she's retrograde. She's consistent. But with Mars, again, this moment that it makes an alignment with the sun and the earth, it's either a conjunction or an opposition. So it's a conjunction when it's on the far side of the sun, far away from us. So that's a point to keep in the back of your head. And then during his retrograde, he ends up being exactly opposite the sun in like the middle of his retrograde. And so I was looking at past years and future years, like when is Mars retrograde? Because if you think about a circle, it doesn't have a beginning or an end. You learn that from Harry Potter when they're trying to get into the Raven house. The Raven house? No, Raven what is it? What's the...
You're asking the wrong girl.
Ravenclaw? Ravenclaw sounds really weird on my ears right now. I think it's Ravenclaw. The Ravenclaw house dorm room they're trying to get in. And so Harry and Luna learn together that a circle has neither a beginning nor an end. I'm pretty sure I could be making that up. It's the wrong part of the book. I don't know. Anyways, I see it as, I'll use my hands as visuals now if I stop sharing the screen. We have like one circle going of Mars, if he has this point where he begins his cycle and then he goes around and around and around. That point can be considered when he's conjunct the sun. So he's on the far side of the sun. And as he makes his orbit around and around, he goes through those cycles of, growth, exploding in his energy, then coming back, dying and being reborn. But you can also see his cycle starting on the other side when he's physically closest to the earth in retrograde. And so you see it as like there's these two circles that are happening at the same time, these two cycles. And one is, Mars, the cycle when he begins being conjunct the sun, and one being when he's retrograde, because I don't think that either are appropriately just, I don't know. I feel like neither really fit in both the dynamics of being, I don't know how to describe it. My brain understood it earlier today, but looking at the dates of these cycles, making things more practical. Last year, October 7th or 8th, October 7th, where is it? In the calendar. October 7th, Mars was conjunct the sun. So Mars was on the far side of the solar system, and he was in Libra. So if you look at the last time he was conjunct direct, on the far side, he was in Virgo. The time before that, it was Leo. The time before that, it was Gemini. And then I didn't write down any previous years. The next time will be in Scorpio. So he doesn't quite go from sign to sign to sign, because sometimes he might skip over. But there's this consistent movement backwards, right? Libra, no, Gemini, forwards through the zodiac belt. Remember when we looked at Venus, she moves backwards through the zodiac belt with her conjunctions, because we were, the last time she was doing her Cazimi, she was at 0 degrees Scorpio, and now she's at 29 degrees Libra. Mars moves forwards, so from Gemini to Leo to Virgo to Libra, and then into Scorpio. And then when it comes to the retrogrades, he kind of takes bigger chunks or bigger leaps from sign to sign, so to speak. So in 2015, he was retrograde in 2014, he was retrograde in Libra, so the sun was in Aries. And then in 2016, he was retrograde in Sagittarius, and then in 18 in Aquarius, and then 2020 in Aries, and now in Gemini. So he's been moving through the masculine signs, which I think is also very interesting. Like when it comes to the direct conjunctions, He's had a mix of like feminine and masculine signs, but for the most part, Mars has been retrograding like in these very masculine signs that he's probably more comfortable in. Don't know what it means for you, but I just think it's interesting and worth noting. So anyways, he's going retrograde. I'm gonna like stop being like a little mysterious person with my hand gestures for a second. He's going retrograde at the end of the month, well, a couple days on the 30th, and he will be opposite of the sun on December 8th at 16 degrees Gemini. And those gates from the human design perspective are 5 and 35, 5s in Sag, 35s in Gemini. He's currently in gate 12, and I think, yeah, 12.4. And then when he goes direct on January 23rd, he'll be at 8 degrees, which is gate of Gemini, which is gate 16. Didn't write down the line. And he'll go direct on March 15th. I mean, not direct, he'll leave his retrograde zone on March 15th. And then like the next thing, like I said, will be in Scorpio. That's the time that he'll be conjunct the sun. So another thing to note is like when you are born, Mars is in this certain relationship with like your chart and the sun. And every 15 years, he'll kind of repeat that because he'll go retrograde in the same sign every 15 years or so. Again, for Venus, it's 8 years. So every 15-ish, it's not, my hands, sorry, if you're listening, you don't have the displeasure of watching me make very weird gestures. Unlike Venus has her regular 8-year cycles. Mars is our longer, obviously, he's further out. They take 15 years or so. So every 15-ish and a half years, you'll notice that Mars is going retrograde that year in the sign that he perhaps retrograded in when you were born. If he went retrograde the year you were born, otherwise it'd be like the year before or after. So again, that next pattern repeats at age 30, or was it 35? I guess it's 30, 31, something like that. Coinciding interestingly with Saturn returns. So those are my long-winded notes. I don't know how beneficial they are to you, listener, but thanks for sticking with me and listening while I make weird hand gestures. But in terms of like practicality, I've mentioned this in a previous episode where Mars from the human design perspective rules over mutation and how we experience that that individual circuitry where we mutate, we're in our own process and things change. Third line energy, third line still with mutation and adaptation. So Mars helps us with that. And so I feel like if you pay attention to your Mars cycles, you'll notice how adaptive and mutative you are during these times. Look back. I always feel like be an astrologer, look back historically at your life, try to pinpoint when things happen and look at what was happening astrologically, and you'll get a sense of how you interact individually with the planetary movements. Because again, like Jupiter, it'll be different for all of you. It's not one size fits the bill. So Sarah, please start talking so I can stop talking.
No, that was very good and very informational. And I think, a few key takeaways here, on the one hand, like it's because we're also looking at it from the lens of human design, not just astrology. Like it isn't just like, oh my God, it's in Gemini and like everything that is archetypally associated with Gemini is just going to like fall on hard times because Mars is retrograde, or anyone who has Gemini placements. Again, it's going to, there's going to be more of an emphasis on specific areas in Gemini, depending on the specific place that Mars is retrograding. So different gates and the like. And then as far as, you just talking about how there's kind of this like mutative force that is being kindled because of Mars's proximity to Earth. Like for me, this is, I'm 31. This is my Mars return natally. I was born with Mars direct, but Mars was in Gemini for, I think, like many months before I was born, and it was retrograde before I was born too. So I was born on the other side of a Mars retrograde in Gemini after it had gone direct. But many people that were in my cohort, my generational cohort, had Mars in Gemini because it took up like many months of the specific year of my, graduating class. So it's a energy that I'm very used to, and it's going to be intriguing to see the types of things that come up because, again, this is post Saturn return. Saturn's still in Aquarius, but for me, it's post Saturn return in the sense that like it's already gone over my natal Saturn, and now I have what I would like to consider a little bit more of a Saturnian influence on my life. So Saturn's been filled up. Mars has now been filled up too. And so I'm thinking that, you know, there's going to be more hand holding between the two planets that are both in air signs for me now that I've moved past some of my younger Mars and Gemini energies and moving into, you know, kind of the post Saturn return, Mars return energy. So it's going to, you know, like Laura said, it's going to look different on everyone, but I, for one, am just not, I can already sense I have 8th house, Mars and Gemini, natally, and now Mars return, that like, you know, some things that have been happening already is that like I've been helping my family members with, you know, tech. There's been people have gotten hacked, and I've had to like get on the back end to help work through this type of technological, other people's, you know, energy, money, time, emotional burden. But like very Gemini on the very like mercurial tech front, I've had to like get in there. And so that's shown up. I know that there's going to be some debts that I'm going to be paying off, which I'm looking forward to because I actually feel like I'm in a place to be able to do it. And so that feels very Mars in the 8th house in Gemini, with a mutating force, right? So like, whereas younger me may have pushed off debts, it's like now me is like, okay, let's just cut these out and pay them off. So those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to with the Mars retrograde in Gemini. And for everyone, it's gonna, again, I feel like I'm a broken record, but it's gonna be specific to your specific natal chart configuration. So it'll absolutely depend, but just to say, it's not all doom and gloom with Mars retrograde. Just like it hasn't been all doom and gloom with us having 6 planets retrograde. We had many planets retrograde over the past few months. So Mars retrograde is going to be specific, but it isn't going to be completely incoherent. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Mars retrograde. So we talked about Jupiter into Pisces retrograde, Mars in Gemini retrograde. Is there anything you want to touch on now that we've moved through the first eclipse of this eclipse season?
No, I feel like I wasn't, severely impacted by it because I'm not a fixed sign person. I don't have a lot of fixed energy in my chart. I feel like the majority of it came through, as you guys could tell, from my melancholic preponderance of death and the future of humanity. But other than that, I feel like things have been normal. It's quite cool, radically cool. It's like radical, like not radically, but it's radical. Physically, I deteriorate when it comes to eclipses. Like my body gets super sensitive around them, and I feel like I'm bedridden for like 2 days with a migraine. And this time I was normal, and I'm very happy that the planets went easy on me this time because like my physical body is not happy with eclipses. And I guess like knock on wood, I'm speaking too soon because we have another one coming up, but it's usually solar eclipses that do me in. So just want to say, if you're feeling out of sorts, it's okay. There's a astrological reason for it. It'll get better. Maybe you don't need to go to the doctor, but maybe you do. I don't know your body. But just if you're feeling heavy, there's a reason. But other than that, I don't think I have anything else. Because again, I'm not personally impacted by it. But Sarah, as you are our fixed sign gal, how are you doing?
I mean, it's interesting because, you know, South Node eclipse in my first house, like I did same. I mean, there's a deterioration on the physical level, but like what it's felt like more so is I had a migraine. I've had some, you know, there's been some sicknesses in my house. And so like I've had to like double down on all of my health tools, which for me is like lots of milk thistle, lots of echinacea, lots of lemon, lots of tea, hot tea, ginger, like just going straight for the most healthy antibacterial, antiviral, antimicrobial stuff. to kind of keep me on the up and up. I did have a migraine the day after the eclipse. I like could not look at light. So, and I took some Advil and it was fine. But, you know, there's something very physically relevant about South Node eclipses in your first house and detoxification oriented. And so I just thought it was a good, you know, astrological experience to like see where like nothing heinous happened, but there was some detoxing. And you know, with the solar eclipse, like this is part of like the full 18-month cycle, but also the next 6-month cycle before the next set of eclipses, where we have another solar eclipse, because now we're going to have a lunar eclipse in November, but it won't be another solar one until I think, you know, close to Aries Taurus season of next year. So just to say those things, it's been destabilizing for many. There's a chaotic element to it for many, and there's also a magical element of it to many, because it's like, how did these different things line up? Like, how did the fractal get, and you know, to think about the north nodes and how they represent our kind of like our life trajectory, or like our path. Like with these eclipses, it's like there's kind of this like pushing us back into the path of whatever it is in the Maya and the illusion of materiality. And so like it could quite feel very magical, because it's like we're getting put back on our correct fractal, or if we've been off of it, like there might be things that get taken away from us that suck, because our ego minds didn't want those things to be taken away. But if we can surrender and just think, okay, this is supposed to happen. This is for my ultimate like totality. You know, this is for the totality of my life. It becomes a lot less troublesome. So I think that's all I wanted to say on the eclipse.
Anything else astrologically or human design or gene keys related that you want to touch on? Or
well, just that Saturn went direct. We talked about this last time, but Saturn's direct, and that just means, you know, we might not have talked about it.
We did.
So Saturn went direct, I think it was on the 23rd, and it was the day after the Venus Cazimi, so I think it was Sunday. And that just means that the Saturn square Uranus energy is finally dissipating and moving, and Saturn is on its way out of Aquarius. Whereas in 2023, it's going to be moving into Pisces. And so those of us who have Saturn returns in Aquarius, we're almost finished with them. And again, the Saturn square Uranus has been in part responsible for like the deep feeling of instability that a lot of people have been having, or like the stress tests that people have been having. I've seen a lot of stress testing of relationships on the interpersonal level. And so I think that there's been a complete like washing away of a lot of the things that weren't working. And now like the eclipse season is like, okay, like now we can plant some, now we can show you where like there's like new things that are eventually going to come into into view. They may not be fully formed yet, but it's like a lot of the stuff that had to move out of the way was to make room for new things coming in. And now that we don't have Saturn going up against the, you know, the awakener, the evolutionary Uranus, there's a little bit more stability that we can start to cultivate within our lives in a way that feels more long lasting, or like we're able to hold on to it for a little bit longer. You know, obviously I'm thinking in my head, no choice. Like there's no choice. But, you know, from an intentionality level, trying to be a conscious co-creator, or at least consciously handing over the reins, there can be a sense of ease maybe in finding that some of the chaotic transformative energy is like going to kind of let up, and we're going to be in more of a solid energy. I think that's it. Do you want us to touch on that?
No, I was just wondering, like 2023 is going to be big because Pluto's moving into Aquarius, and Pluto moves really slowly. It spends 13 plus years in each sign.
Yep.
Saturn's moving into Pisces. Jupiter will be, you know, moving through what, Aries and Taurus, right? Neptune staying in Pisces though, right? I don't think Neptune's moving. So I'm not sure what else, but like those are the big movers and shakers. So it's just worth noting that this life might change, life might alter, because these really slow, consistent energies are changing state, changing vibration, changing how they affect us. And like we get little flavors of them, as they change from degree to degree, but or if they like hit a planetary placement in our charts. But big stuff is happening next year. So I want to say prepare yourself, but the only way you can do that is aligning to your strategy and authority and not letting your brain mess everything up. But yeah, other than that, like you can't really prepare yourself mentally. So fun stuff. But I think that's everything on my end.
Okay, sweet. All right, so I think this was a pretty robust episode.
I talked a lot, sorry. I had a crisis, sorry.
No, so did I. I mean, we both talked a lot. It's fine. Some of our episodes are like about an hour, some are like closer to an hour 15, an hour 20, but it's basically always around that amount of time. So yeah, I think that can tie us up for this week. I believe that the sun is going to be moving into 44. And we're going to be moving in a couple weeks out of the quarter of duality and into the quarter of mutation. So that's something interesting to note based on the tone shift that we're going to experience around the eclipse, not the next eclipse, the lunar eclipse. So just, more to come. Everything is always in transit and in motion. So yeah, we've always got a lot to talk about. Just a secondary reminder to, if you feel like you connect with our energy, if you feel like you're on our fractal, if you like the content, if you're interested in gene keys, human design, and astrology, and other divinatory systems that we occasionally throw in, please feel free to subscribe, maybe so that you can get notifications when we post a new episode, because we are following right along with the energies of the transiting sun through the different gates. So it's mostly relevant during the time period, within the first few days of the time period that we post. So other than that, Laura, do you want to add anything? Okay, sweet. Well, it's been real this time, guys, and we will see you next time.
Hasn't it? Sure has. Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next time.